Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck and I get to interview the most fascinating people. Maria Spenst is our guest today, but I bet you don't know her by her Russian name. Mary, welcome to Journeys and Journals. Mary Nations, how did you come all the way from Siberia to Southern Oregon?
Well, my parents left Siberia in 1929, and things were getting real hard there, and so they decided that this is what they would do. Many people had left Russia prior to this, and we were kind of the last group of people that left Russia.
When you say the last group, you mean we're allowed to leave?
We're allowed to leave, yes.
So,
and when we got to the border, my parents didn't have any kind of papers, any passport papers or anything like that. So the plan was to go to Germany and get our papers so that we could go somewhere else. And anyway, it took 6 months to get the papers straightened.
Now, I'm not going to ask your age, but how old were you in 1929?
Well, when we left, I was 9 months old.
And mother, father, 9-month-old baby, and were there other children?
Yes, I had a brother that was 2 years older than myself, and a sister that was 3 years older.
You mean a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, and an infant?
I guess if you call me an infant, I was just about ready to leave that part of it and give it to somebody else, that name to somebody else.
How's that, Mary?
Well, while my parents were working on their papers, my younger sister was born.
You mean there are 3 Russian children in your family, and then there's a German
That's right.
sister, and then I know that the family doesn't stop at 4 children, because I've got a book here that shows a family photo of how many?
10.
10
of us.
Children.
But they actually did have 11. The first child passed away.
The very first baby.
Yes.
And you're acquainted with that kind of sorrow. I read about other family members that lost babies.
Yes.
Mary, you don't have any recollection, of course, of being in Germany, but did they tell you stories about, did your family leave Russia with money or jewels or how?
When the folks came to the border, the people just gave them their billfolds and they took the money out and they didn't leave any money. And there was one person that my dad talked about that had an extra pocket in his billfold. And so he ended up with some money because they didn't see that. But when my parents left Russia, they said to my parents that you can go, but don't ever come back. And that's the way they felt about people that were leaving. You know, if you don't like it here, why, don't come back.
Now, were your parents mature people, or what age were they?
They were in their early 30s.
When they left?
Yes.
And I got the feeling that Grandpa wanted to come along with you.
Yes, Grandpa wanted to come along, and since there was this waiting period, we were waiting for the message that we could go, he decided that, well, he'd go say goodbye to his relatives. And he didn't get back, and the word came that they could leave, and they felt like they had to go when the time came, and so they left Grandpa behind.
Oh.
And that was very, very traumatic to my parents.
Of course.
They did talk about that, but they really never have talked an awful lot about it. Just like when my dad was in this service, he never liked to talk about it. He never liked to talk about hard times.
Now, the service.
Yeah, he was in this service in World War I.
In what uniform?
In uniform, yeah. For the English. He was on the English side.
Because in this marvelous, marvelous book, well, folks, this is what it is: Siberia and Beyond, and then searching for a better life. When was this compiled and why?
Well, the family had talked about that we should all enter our stories. And it took quite a while to do that because 10 people and not always, not everyone was always willing to, or didn't feel maybe as able to write their story. And so some of them are very brief. But anyway, I think it took over a year to do that.
Oh, it is wonderful. So each one of you children wrote your story and about your children?
We almost all wrote our stories. I had one sister who's a teacher that did some of the stories. If the brothers weren't coming up with their story, she went and filled in because she was very anxious that this be compiled.
Well, here's a whole section about Dad. He turns out to be one of my heroes. He had not much of an education.
That's right. He had an 8th grade education.
And spoke very, no English.
No, not when we came here.
Or German?
German. German, he could speak Russian. He could also speak Chinese. He'd been in China for a couple of years, and he could speak Chinese.
As a prisoner of war?
He was a prisoner of war, but I don't think it was in China. I think it was somewhere else. Although
because that would have been the war when he was quite a young man and left the family.
Yeah.
All the men were sent off to war.
That was before my dad was married. So
Tough.
see, he was young, yes.
Tough, tough stuff. Then here's one of my hero stories. Katrina. What a beautiful name. Did she keep that name?
Yes, she did.
Came to this country, and tell me a little bit about Grandma, mother to you.
Mother lost her mother at 7 years of age, and her father remarried. And the story is that the second mother wasn't that great a stepmother, and so there was a period of time there before Mother's father remarried where the children were kind of accepted by other families, friends, and relatives, and the children stayed with them until my grandfather got married again. And
well,
then
they
all
were
came home.
parceled out.
Yeah, they were parceled out, that's right.
And intended, the story that came through to me, and this is generations. These children at 9 and 10 and 11 were indentured or intended to be serving the family they lived with, including
That's
Mary. Right?
Well, of course, when I was, as I was growing up, I did work for people but of course this was later, and I was just very young. I was 9 years of age when I went and worked for people during the summer months, did babysitting, picked the string beans and weeded the garden, and got the cows, and also helped milk the cows. And so.
And now, Mary, did you get a lot of money for this kind of thing?
One year, when I did that, they brought a load of grain over to my parents, and that fed the chickens for the next year. So that was really pretty good pay.
And your pocket, how much went into your pocket?
No money ever went in my pocket when I worked in those years. Because
you were helping to support your mother and father and brothers and sisters. Is that right?
Yes. My oldest sister and my oldest brother, of course, the three of us, we worked away from home, and any money that we received was given to my parents.
Now, you were living where at this time?
We were living in Rostron, Saskatchewan, Canada.
So you moved from Siberia, bitter cold.
Yes, right.
To Germany, a little warmer, and then up to Saskatchewan.
That's right.
Back.
And it was cold there. It was very cold there.
Snowy, snowy. One part of the story that I read was about the year that the grain, this was back in Siberia, the government was taking your dad's.
They did that. They came and helped themselves. And we were talking about when my father was imprisoned. He had gone to to shop, and he brought eggs and butter. And when they found out how much butter and eggs he had, that was too much. So they imprisoned him. And he was able to get out of prison by having friends contact the warden and tell him that the eggs and the butter was going to be doled out to different members, living there. That he wasn't really buying it just for his family. And so then they let him out.
Unbelievable. So he was in prison in Russia, and then he was in prison again as a prisoner of war.
Yes, right.
So what was freedom like? I mean, did they tell you about coming to the new world, the free world, Canada? What was it like?
Well, I'm sure it was a very relaxed feeling, because they could do what they wanted. They could go and buy what they wanted if they had the money. Money
was scarce.
Yeah. But it seemed like everybody was poor. Because it was during Depression, see? It was 1930s when we came.
Depression, and also it was the Dust Bowl, and dry. To get anything to grow was hard.
Was.
Your family had an unusual house. It seemed they moved on and on to better things. They had to pay back all that money from the passage.
Yes, they did. It took, I think we'd been in Canada for 10 years before my folks were able to pay the money back for the passage.
And who loaned them the money, and who trusted them?
It was the Mennonites. The Mennonites helped my parents when they came over. And my mother always says that the Mennonites were very good to them. And one of the Mennonite farmers hired my dad for $25 a month. And the going wage was really $30 a month, but my dad didn't know how to harness horses the way they do in Canada. And so the first month they only gave him $25 because of that. The next month they gave him $30.
Well, now, the housing was, one time it was a shanty?
Yes, it was. Just a sloped roof.
Another time it was a soddy?
Well, now that was, of course, in Russia. They made their own bricks and whitewashed the houses and everything. But that was probably a fairly good home, because it was probably well insulated.
Yeah, big pieces of sod or whatever they were using. The pictures here, I'm excited because you show the family. Now, are you in this picture, Mary?
Yes.
Tiny baby?
That's me right there.
And so this would have been as you were leaving the old country.
Yes, right.
The family above is...
it's my dad's family.
Okay.
My dad came from a small family. I think there was 4 children in the family.
I'm grateful that you have these pictures. Can you imagine leaving the old country and probably taking very little? How did your mother possibly manage the transoceanic with 2 babies in diapers?
Well, right. I don't know, but I'm sure it was very hard. And when my folks basically planned to move to British Columbia, but when they got to Saskatchewan, my mother was so tired of traveling and they met somebody there that they knew from Russia, and so they decided to stay because they knew somebody. And he took us to the immigration house. This immigration house used to be an old hospital, and so there were other immigrants there.
And people could stay there.
Yes.
And
we were there just a very short time because it wasn't long, and my dad bought this. They didn't have much money, but they probably saved every nickel they earned, and they were able to. But they did borrow some money from an uncle. They borrowed $100 from an uncle. And
how did you find food?
Well, I think this is where the Mennonites came in and helped. Now, and somebody gave us some flour, a partial bag of flour, and my mother made bread from that. And
but
she
you
sifted out.
You have a story about that flour. What?
She sifted out the mouse droppings, and she made made bread. And it was very hard for my parents to eat the bread, but of course us kids didn't know any better. So, and when you're hungry,
when
you
you
eat
are
what
hungry.
you've got.
Mary, this is not your first time on TV with Better Life Television or with our show, but this is the first time we've heard stories about Siberia and beyond. Coming to this country, I mean, you're famous for your Afghans. You've given Afghans to Better Life Television, and people have, it's been a fundraiser. I've never seen Mary, but what she's doing, and that's part of your story too, that idle hands.
Yeah, my mother always was doing something. She never sat without picking up some kind of handwork.
Now, what were the clothes like for these girls and boys?
They were very nice. My mother she was very talented with sewing.
But where'd she get the material?
We got material from, there was different people that gave, you know, people will, when you're poorer, people will give you your hand-me-downs, and if the material was pretty good, she would rip them up and make dresses and clothing for us. She made jackets. She just really did very nice handwork. And she did a lot of knitting. She knit our stockings, and she made cloth shoes for us in the wintertime.
Cloth shoes
Yes.
in Canada?
Yes, in the wintertime, and we just wore rubbers over them.
Now I understand. Mary, there's an incredible story in here about play, because there was time for play too. In the springtime, the water was running high. Why don't you tell that story?
Well, this particular time, and my parents didn't want us to go and play in the ditch, but we begged to go play in the ditch. Somebody had a raft, and the neighbor kids, there was 9 of us that gathered together, and we were playing there in the water, and it turned dark before we even realized it. But while we were there, it was just dusk, there was a man that passed us and kind of looked us over, and my younger sister, it scared her, and she was on the outside, so I was going to be real brave, and I really felt afraid too. But anyway, I says, well, I'll go on the outside. And so she got next to me. And so this man that had passed us came back a little later, and he grabbed me. And everybody just screamed. And I was so frightened, I couldn't even scream. But one of my sisters, my oldest sister, had the oar, and she raised it and acted like she was going to hit him over the head with it, and so he let me go. But while I was there, and while he had me in his hands, it wasn't long, and we didn't wear slacks at that time. You know, there was a period of time where the women didn't wear slacks. And it wasn't long, and he had his hands under my clothes. So anyway, I just think the Lord took care of me, because I think something drastic would have happened had we.
Well, that sister of yours was surely smart. Now, you and your sister, and maybe your brothers, what's ever become of them?
Well, my oldest sister is now in Tennessee, and she's with her daughter.
As she got interested in education, right?
Yes.
All of you? Dad has 8th grade, mother has 3rd grade.
Yes.
And what about the
my brother's in 8th grade, and I had one sister that took 10th grade. But all the children made something of themselves. And,
if I could just rave a little bit about Mary, she is a nurse, but nursing was only part of her profession. Then she was also the builder of houses with her husband, Olin. That was after work or on days off. Is that right, Mary?
that was fun.
That was fun.
That gave me a chance to be with my husband.
Mother of 2 children. And
I took them with me, and I told them stories while they were watching me, watching me work.
well, but they're not lazy kids either.
No.
Tell me about those kids.
Well, both Sandy and Randy are leasing Royal Gardens, and that's a facility that my husband built.
senior care residence, one of 4 that you folks built.
Yeah, right.
There's a lovely picture in here, I guess it's the second one. And of course, my mother-in-law was in the facility that they are operating. They too have been incredible, and written in your book a piece. Yes. And that's so nice. Now you've got grandchildren and great-grandchildren?
3 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren.
You know, you're not, we already know that when you were born, so mature. And what do you do with your time? Twiddle your thumbs?
Oh, I'm babysitting the great-grandchildren, and I love it.
I do too. But Olin couldn't come today because he had to fill in for Mary while she's on TV. He's doing the child care. It's just been a story. Do you know about how much, you said it took them 10 years to pay back the Mennonites. Yes. Mm-hmm. How about these educations? You went to a Christian boarding school. Well, and how long to pay off those bills?
I never owed anything at the end of the year. I worked enough to pay off my bills.
And when you got to college and nurses training, who subsidized that?
It was all the work of my hands, I guess. But the good Lord gave me the health and strength to do that.
I think work is a great blessing. This is one of the pictures that just thrilled me. When you talk work, what work did you enjoy the very most?
I enjoyed every part of nursing. When I was in orthopedics, I liked that, and when I was in medical ward, I enjoyed that. I never did feel like I had any particular favorite.
Was there ever a time, ever a patient that thrilled you more than to be able to be bedside your own mother?
Yes, that really was a thrill to me too. And that was in Vancouver, British Columbia. And so when I went there, I thought, well, I'll wear my nurse's uniform and my cap and really look like a nurse. But you know, they frowned on that. They didn't want me to wear my cap, so I took it off.
Ah.
But anyway, my mother had her hip pinned in Vancouver.
Now, the reason for this book, there's one very, very special reason, that it was all compiled. You had a birthday party. Whose birthday? Your dad turned 100 years old.
Yeah, right.
And all of you honored him?
Yes, we were all there. And that's right. We tried to have that ready for that time.
How many came to his birthday?
All the children were there. And I'm not sure about I don't think all the grandchildren were there. But all the kids were able to be there. And my dad was still doing quite well.
At 100?
Yes.
Bright as it could be.
Yes.
He had to work. Well, Mary, before we close, I'm going to have you read the prayer. Every night, he prayed for his children. But Mary and Olin were there at the farewell party. This is Dennis, our TV. Dennis, what's your hat? He's been the strongest technical director for us for years. And here are Ann and Dave Reed as their farewell. These people were here from the very, very first.
Yes, yes.
I heard a funny story.
We were on the board. Both Olin and I were on the board when we first started.
And I heard a funny story that they just give, and then someone would say, we need to have you give some more. Have you ever run out?
Well, every now and then they've called us and been concerned about not being able to meet all their obligations. But the good Lord's really blessed us, so we have been able to help some.
And I love that story, and I know that it's true in Better Life Television, and a lot of us have walked by faith.
Yes.
This has been Better Life TV is not highly funded.
That's right.
But it has been blessed incredibly. 7 counties now that it goes to, and maybe even more soon, clear up to Eugene. Won't
yes,
that
it's
be
really exciting to know that we're trying to branch out even more. And I know that people will really be blessed by having it. It's because we have been blessed here to have the program here.
Well, Mary, in your hand, Maria. Mary, which name feels more comfortable to you? Both.
I'm just used to being called Mary.
Your father had this lovely, lovely prayer. It was a part of your everyday?
He gave this prayer to one of my sisters and said, "This is the prayer that I have prayed for our family." And this is how it was. I suppose he made it up. "O Lord, keep the circle of our little family unbroken. When we stand before you in the judgment day, compensate for our mistakes and failures as parents, and counteract the influence of the evil world that would undermine the faith of your children. And especially, Lord, we ask for your involvement when our children stand at the crossroads deciding whether or not to walk the Christian path. They will be beyond our care at the moment, and we humbly ask you to be there. Send a friend or a leader to help them choose the right direction. They were yours before they were born, and now we give them back to you in faith, knowing that you love them even more than we do. Toward that end, we dedicate this day of fasting and prayer."
Now you folks know why I'm so excited. I'm so thrilled to have known these people. They have blessed my life so much. And thank you, Mary, for being my friend. And I'm Bernie Martin Beck, just saying it's been a privilege to be with you.